Riley Carter shifted nervously on her feet as she walked briskly through the fluorescent-lit corridors of Washington, D.C.'s busiest hospital. It was her first week as an ER nurse, and the chaos of emergency medicine had already begun to wear on her. Monitors beeped in rapid succession, patients moaned from pain, and the muffled announcements over the intercom blended into a chaotic symphony that only hospital staff could decipher. Every corner held a potential crisis, every room a story of pain, fear, or hope. Riley had always dreamed of helping people, but nothing could have prepared her for nights like this. She paused at a nurse's station, checking charts and updating vitals. Her hands were steady, though her heart still raced from the adrenaline that never seemed to leave her body. This was her element now. She reminded herself organized chaos. Every beep and groan demanded attention, every second mattered. She smiled faintly at a small child in a nearby room who was clutching a teddy bear. "We'll take good care of you," she whispered softly, though her voice carried a calm authority that belied her rookie status. Outside the hospital, the city had its own rhythm, one that often collided violently with the hospital's walls. Sirens wailed in the distance, signaling accidents, muggings, or worse. Riley barely noticed. She was immersed in her environment, eyes scanning every monitor, every chart, every patient. Yet, somewhere at the back of her mind, a subtle warning nagged, a sense that tonight would be different. It was then that Commander Jack "Hawk" Reynolds entered the hospital. A former Navy SEAL now working as a security consultant, Reynolds' job was to assess hospital vulnerabilities and ensure safety protocols were being followed. But tonight, his instincts told him this was more than a routine inspection. He paused in the corridor near the ER, observing the staff in action. His gaze lingered on Riley. She moved with purpose, her hands calm, her eyes sharp, and her presence commanding. Even in the midst of routine chaos, she exuded a calm confidence that drew his attention immediately. Reynolds had seen soldiers, operators, and elite team members. Instinct told him she possessed a rare composure. "Interesting," he muttered under his breath. He noted how she communicated without shouting, how she guided others subtly yet effectively, how her calm seemed to ripple outward, influencing the room. It was as if she created an invisible buffer between order and chaos, an unseen force that brought cohesion. Reynolds could sense the potential even before any real crisis hit. Meanwhile, Riley moved toward the trauma bay to check on a patient who had just been wheeled in from a car accident. The young man's leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and he was pale, groaning in pain. Riley knelt beside him, her hands gloved and steady, speaking in soothing tones. "You're going to be okay. We're taking care of you." Her words were soft but firm, reassuring the patient and commanding the room. She expertly assessed his injuries, making mental notes for the attending physician. Her eyes flicked to the monitors, then to the IV line, then to the door, always aware of her surroundings. The hospital's normal buzz of activity was interrupted by an unusual tension. Staff members whispered quietly about incidents in the city, reports of a shooting nearby, a suspect still at large. The air seemed heavier, the fluorescent lights flickered briefly, and Riley felt a shiver run down her spine. Something was coming, she realized, though she didn't know what. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm, reminding herself that panic was useless. Her training, her instincts, her determination to protect others, these were her tools. Reynolds continued his quiet observation, nodding subtle cues that confirmed his intuition. Riley's posture, her controlled breathing, the way she scanned rooms and hallways without appearing frantic. She had no military background, no combat training, yet the precision of her movements reminded him of operators he had trained with. In a high-stress environment, she remained the eye of the storm. Riley's attention shifted as a nurse called out for assistance in another room. She moved quickly, efficiently, checking vitals, adjusting medication, and providing reassurance to frightened patients. Every interaction, every touch, every word was deliberate. She moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times, though it was only her first week. Reynolds took note. The ability to remain composed under intense pressure was rare, especially in civilians. Then it happened. A loud, jarring crash echoed through the ER, making the patient startle and staff freeze. The intercom buzzed with a flurry of announcements and alarms began to sound, signaling a security breach. Riley's stomach tightened, but her mind went immediately to action. She scanned the corridor ahead, her instincts kicking in. Something or someone was coming, and it was not routine. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. He had trained for situations like this countless times, yet even he felt the subtle tension in the air escalate. His hand instinctively hovered near his concealed gear. The calm before the storm was ending, and he could feel the surge of danger approaching. His gaze returned to Riley. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. Her composure was unwavering, even as her mind processed every possible threat, every exit, every vulnerable patient. The ER, usually a place of organized chaos, felt suddenly fragile. Every person in it could become a target. Every second mattered. Riley's presence was magnetic, commanding yet reassuring. She moved toward the nurses' station, quietly signaling staff and checking on patients, mentally preparing for whatever was coming. Reynolds knew instinctively that when the storm hit, her calm could make the difference between life and death. And then from the shadows near the entrance, a figure appeared, a silhouette that didn't belong. The quiet night had been shattered. Riley's pulse quickened, but her movements remained smooth, deliberate. Her first week in the ER had taught her many lessons, but none like this. She had to protect, to survive, and to keep others alive. Reynolds adjusted his stance, ready. Both were about to be tested. The night, the hospital, and every life inside were on the edge of chaos, and Riley Carter was ready to face it. The sudden crash of the automatic doors reverberated through the like a thunderclap. Riley Carter's head snapped toward the noise. A man had barged in, gun raised, eyes wild and frantic, his every step echoing menace across the sterile tiles. He moved with desperate purpose, scanning the room as if searching for someone or something. Patients screamed, chairs toppled, and monitors beeped frantically, creating a chaotic chorus that made Riley's stomach knot. But she remained unflinching. She took a deep, steadying breath, her mind instantly shifting into problem-solving mode. The gunman's voice cut sharply through the panic. "Everybody down, move nowhere or you get it." His words were harsh, erratic, dripping with fear and fury. Some of the staff froze, their faces pale, their hands shaking. Others ducked instinctively behind counters or carts. But Riley stepped forward, her calm presence contrasting sharply with the panic around her. Her first priority was the safety of the patients, especially the most vulnerable. A small boy clung to his mother, whimpering in terror. Riley approached them slowly, crouching down to their level. "You're safe, okay? We're going to keep you safe," she said softly, yet her tone carried authority. She gently guided them behind a medical cart, shielding them with her body. The boy's mother blinked, unsure whether to trust a rookie nurse amid a gunman's rage, but Riley's composure was undeniable. The act, seemingly small, radiated confidence that began to ripple across the room, giving the terrified staff and patients a faint anchor of hope. From his hiding spot near the nurses' station, Commander Jack Hawk, Reynolds watched silently. He had entered the hospital moments earlier for routine security consultation, but now he was evaluating Riley's performance under immediate life-threatening stress. He noticed the precision of her movements, the careful placement of barriers, the way she kept patients calm while subtly directing staff. His instincts told him that she wasn't just lucky, she was instinctively tactical, able to calculate outcomes under extreme stress. Operators like her were rare. The gunman stomped toward a cluster of patients in the waiting area, his gun raised as his eyes darted nervously. He was desperate, cornered by the city's law enforcement who had already been chasing him for hours. The man's energy was unpredictable, agitated, volatile, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Riley didn't flinch. Instead, she observed, measured, and acted. She positioned herself between him and the most vulnerable patients, moving deliberately while keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. Her mind raced through options. She identified the nearest exits, checked the room layouts for obstacles, and noted potential choke points. She thought about the staff, some frozen, some scared, some trying to help but inexperienced in handling armed threats. She began issuing quiet, precise instructions, guiding both staff and patients with a calm authority that diffused panic in small but critical ways. Every word was calculated, every movement intentional. Reynolds' hand instinctively rested near his concealed gear, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. Yet he remained a careful observer. Few civilians maintained composure under direct threat. Fewer still demonstrated the mental agility to anticipate danger while protecting others. Riley's calm wasn't passive. It was active, strategic. He watched her shield a child from the gunman's line of sight, redirect a nurse who had frozen in fear, and subtly signal patients to stay behind obstacles. He knew immediately that she had potential that could rival trained operatives in crisis. The gunman's attention swung erratically, his eyes catching Riley's for the first time. She held his gaze briefly, projecting a quiet confidence that contrasted with his frenzied energy. He hesitated, if only for a moment, unsure whether to advance, retreat, or lash out. Riley used that split second to reinforce the safety of her patients, nudging a wheelchair into a protective position and whispering calming words to a panicked teenager. The small actions bought critical time, and in high-stakes scenarios, seconds were life-saving. From across the room, Reynolds noted subtle gestures Riley made, tapping a cart to barricade a hallway, tilting a monitor to block the gunman's line of sight, guiding patients into corners without drawing attention. It was seamless, almost instinctive. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and protective. The gunman fumed, packing back and forth like a caged predator, unaware that he was being subtly controlled by Riley's actions. His aggression was rising, but her calm created a buffer that slowed escalation. She began speaking to the gunman in a low, controlled tone. "Sir, we can help you. Nobody here wants trouble. Let's just stay calm, okay?" The words were soft, soothing, yet firm. Her voice carried a strange authority, one that seemed to register with the man. His gun wavered slightly, his rapid breathing punctuating his indecision. Riley's strategy wasn't confrontation. It was calculated empathy, a psychological maneuver that required courage and quick thinking in equal measure. Reynolds exhaled silently. He had dealt with armed threats countless times, but rarely had he seen someone manage a volatile individual without any formal tactical training. Riley's combination of courage, intelligence, and situational awareness was remarkable. He observed her every move, noting how she redirected attention, mitigated panic, and maintained control. The hospital, normally a place of organized chaos, now hung in delicate balance, with Riley at its center. The gunman's energy grew more volatile. His attention flicked toward a group of nurses moving equipment, and he shouted threats, brandishing the weapon aggressively. Riley assessed the room, calculating the next moves, considering every possibility. She was aware of Reynolds, though she didn't know him, and his presence added a subtle layer of security she could sense without acknowledging. The tension in the air was suffocating, but Riley maintained her calm exterior, her mind a whirl of strategies, contingencies, and protective measures. Every patient she had shielded, every staff member she had guided, was alive because of her calm actions. The gunman paused again, caught between fear and aggression. Reynolds adjusted his position, ready to act if Riley's careful containment failed. Riley's instincts were the difference between life and death tonight, and as she stood poised amid chaos, she was unaware that her first week as an ER nurse had already become legendary in the eyes of the man observing from the shadows. The crash of the doors, the echoes of panic, the beeping monitors, all seemed to fade into a tense silence as Riley held her ground. The ER waited on her next move, the gunman's fury contained by her quiet authority. Reynolds knew that when the situation escalated further, Riley would continue to shape the outcome with every choice she made. The night had only just begun, but one thing was certain. Riley Carter's courage and calm would determine whether chaos would claim the ER or whether lives would be saved. Riley Carter felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The gunman's heavy breathing echoed through the ER, each step he took sending shivers down the spines of patients and staff alike. Panic radiated outward, yet Riley remained the calm center in a storm of terror. Her mind worked at lightning speed, calculating, anticipating, and prioritizing. Every movement mattered. Every second could decide life or death. She crouched slightly behind a medical cart, her hands empty but ready, projecting authority that subtly influenced the room. She knew fear could be contagious. Calmness, however, could save lives. She directed two nurses toward safer corners, whispering precise instructions. "Stay low. Move behind the monitors. Keep your hands visible." The nurses obeyed, trembling, but her calm voice steadied them like a lifeline in a turbulent sea. Riley's eyes flicked constantly, scanning the ER for vulnerabilities. Doorways, hallways, emergency exits, potential barricades. Every detail was noted. Her instincts, sharpened by weeks of high-pressure ER training, guided her actions. But this was no simulation. The threat was real and lives hung in balance. From his vantage point near a structural pillar, Commander Jack Hawk Reynolds watched with a mixture of admiration and tactical analysis. His years as a Navy SEAL had taught him to spot instincts, resilience, and leadership under stress, and Riley displayed all three in abundance. Few civilians maintained composure in the face of armed danger, and fewer still demonstrated the presence of mind to anticipate threats while protecting others. Reynolds' eyes followed her every movement, noting the subtle ways she positioned herself to shield patients and redirect attention. The gunman's movements were unpredictable, jerky, and fueled by panic. He waved the weapon toward a frightened teenager huddled under a hospital bench. Riley moved smoothly, her body shielding the child, speaking softly but firmly. "It's okay. Stay calm. I've got you," she whispered. Her tone carried authority, empathy, and precision, an unusual combination in a rookie nurse. The teenager clung to her guidance instinctively, his fear slowly giving way to trust. Riley's calm had created a small bubble of control amidst chaos, demonstrating the extraordinary power of composed action in extreme situations. Reynolds allowed himself a slow breath, recognizing the psychological skill Riley was displaying. She wasn't just moving people to safety, she was manipulating the energy of the room, redirecting attention, diffusing tension, and controlling the chaos, all without a weapon. He marveled silently. Her actions were instinctual, yet calculated. This was not merely courage, it was situational awareness on a level most operators spent years trying to master. Riley's attention snapped to a new threat, the gunman packing near a cluster of patients, his eyes darting with growing agitation. His desperation was evident. He was a man pushed to the edge, cornered by circumstance and fear. Riley calculated her approach. She needed to slow him down without provoking violence. Her mind raced through tactics. She remembered drills from nursing school, de-escalation techniques, even basic principles of psychology. Her voice became a tool, her presence a shield, her movements a strategy. "Sir, you don't have to hurt anyone," Riley said, her tone steady, calm, but firm. "Let's just take a moment. We can help you. Nobody here wants trouble." The gunman's gaze flickered, uncertainty crossing his features. Her words didn't command him, they invited him, subtly manipulating his emotional state while keeping her distance. Riley's strategy was deliberate. Control the room, protect the vulnerable, buy time, and wait for any tactical advantage. The ER staff, inspired by her composure, began to follow her lead. Even the most frightened nurse found themselves moving with her guidance, repositioning patients, closing doors, and creating makeshift barriers. Riley noticed each action and adjusted, maintaining fluid control over the environment. The room had become a delicate balance of psychological influence and tactical improvisation. Every patient safely shielded was a small victory. Every second Riley kept the gunman's attention on her, instead of the others, was priceless. Reynolds, observing from his concealed position, considered intervention. He could neutralize the threat within seconds, but Riley's strategic handling of the situation was buying time, shaping the gunman's perception and keeping casualties at zero. He understood the rare talent before him. Her calm wasn't passive. It was active, precise, and protective. Her instincts were guiding every decision, blending empathy with tactical sense, an uncanny skill for someone with no formal combat experience. The gunman's eyes lingered on Riley longer than before. He was unsettled by her calm, his aggression warring with confusion. She adjusted her stance subtly, her body language confident but non-threatening. "You're not alone in this. Let's just breathe," she murmured softly, placing herself between him and the nearest patient. Her words were deliberate, her movements deliberate, yet completely fluid. She created distance, shielded the vulnerable, and maintained control. Reynolds nodded internally. This young nurse was extraordinary. Fear clawed at her chest, but Riley didn't allow it to surface. She knew fear could spread faster than bullets in a crisis. Her mind was a calm machine, scanning threats, calculating distances, considering escape routes, analyzing the gunman's body language. Every patient safely moved, every staff member reassured, every moment she bought was a critical win. The ER was her battlefield, and she was commanding it with precision, courage, and intelligence. Minutes stretched into a tense eternity. The gunman's packing became erratic, his desperation increased, but Riley's calm presence acted as a buffer. Every subtle repositioning, every whispered instruction, every reassuring gesture was a strategy, a silent command of the room. Reynolds remained hidden but impressed. She had instincts that rivaled trained operators. Her courage was not loud or flashy. It was quiet, calculated, and lethal in its effectiveness. She had become the anchor in a storm of terror. As the gunman hesitated, momentarily distracted by Riley's controlled presence, Reynolds made a silent calculation. Intervention would be precise, but only if necessary. Riley was buying time, controlling the chaos, and protecting lives without a weapon. The ER's patients remained alive, guided and shielded by a rookie nurse who had discovered her inner strength under extreme pressure. Riley's eyes scanned the room again, noting exits, barricades, and potential cover points. She whispered calming words to frightened staff and patients, guiding them without panic. The gunman's focus shifted, her calm had begun to dominate the room. He was unpredictable, but for the first time his aggression was tempered by hesitation. Riley's strategy was working. Reynolds knew that in moments like these, seconds could save lives, and her instincts were already shaping the outcome. Even as her heart raced, Riley remained the eye of the storm. She was calm, strategic, and deliberate. The ER, once chaotic and panicked, now moved subtly under her influence. Patients were shielded, staff coordinated, and the gunman's aggression wavered. Reynolds felt a growing respect, recognizing a rare combination of courage, intelligence, and instinctive tactical awareness. The battle for control of the ER had begun, and Riley Carter was leading it. The gunman's packing had become almost manic, his eyes darting from patient to patient, staff to staff, as if the walls of the ER were closing in on him. He swung the weapon aggressively, his voice sharp and erratic, shouting threats at anyone who moved. The metallic clack of his boots against the tiled floor echoed through the corridor, and panic radiated outward like ripples across a pond. Every person in the ER felt the weight of danger pressing down. Yet amid the chaos, Riley Carter remained a pillar of calm, moving fluidly, observing every detail, calculating every next move. Riley positioned herself near the nurse's station, creating a natural barrier between the gunman and the most vulnerable patients. Her body language was confident yet non-threatening. She met the man's gaze directly, her tone measured, calm, and unwavering. "We're going to be okay. Nobody here wants to hurt you. Let's just breathe and figure this out," she said, her voice soft but authoritative. Her words carried an odd weight, as if they could carve a path through the storm of fear. The gunman paused, his aggression flickering with hesitation. From behind a structural pillar, Commander Jack Hawk, Reynolds watched with a mix of admiration and calculation. He had entered the hospital for routine security assessment, yet he now found himself observing a civilian handle an active threat with astonishing skill. Riley's movements were deliberate, tactical, and protective. She repositioned patients, whispered instructions to frightened staff, and subtly guided the gunman's attention without raising her voice. Reynolds knew she had instincts that could rival trained operatives. Every subtle adjustment she made was a life-saving maneuver. Riley's mind raced as she weighed her options. She was unarmed, facing a desperate and unpredictable man, yet she had authority on her side, calm authority that could influence perception and behavior. She repositioned herself slightly, blocking the gunman's line of sight to a group of children huddled under a bench. With one hand, she gestured to staff to move quietly behind her, creating a subtle shield. Every movement was calculated, precise, and protective. She was no longer just a nurse. She had become the center of a strategic operation under pressure. The gunman's agitation was rising. His eyes flicked toward exits, his breathing heavy and uneven. He shouted threats, demanding compliance, his finger twitching on the trigger, but Riley maintained her composure. She stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, speaking in soft, controlled tones. "We can help you. Nobody here wants trouble. Let's just take a moment, okay?" Her calmness acted as a buffer, a strange psychological force that slowed his aggression, if only slightly. She was buying time, every second a critical victory. Reynolds evaluated the situation. He could intervene at any moment and neutralize the gunman with precision. Yet Riley's presence was shaping the room in a way that a sudden takedown could disrupt. She had created a fragile balance, a psychological standoff that allowed patients and staff to survive unharmed. Her actions were instinctive yet deliberate, blending empathy, authority, and tactical awareness. Reynolds recognized a rare talent. Riley was not only courageous but intelligent under fire, able to think multiple steps ahead while under extreme stress. The gunman's attention shifted, momentarily distracted by Riley's controlled demeanor. He waved the gun toward a nurse who had frozen behind a supply cart. Riley moved swiftly but smoothly, positioning herself between him and the nurse. She whispered quick instructions to the staff, guiding them with calm authority, directing their movements without panic. Each gesture, each word, was a calculated attempt to manage the environment, contain the threat, and protect the vulnerable. She was orchestrating safety through composure, and it was working. A small cluster of patients huddled under a table, eyes wide with terror. Riley crouched beside them, placing a hand gently on a trembling shoulder. "We're okay," she whispered, her voice steady, her touch reassuring. The children clung to her guidance instinctively, and the adults nearby began to follow her lead. Even the frightened nurses responded, moving as instructed, following her subtle signals. Her calmness was contagious, a lifeline in the chaos. She had transformed fear into order, panic into structured survival. Reynolds adjusted his position, keeping the gunman in view while remaining hidden. He analyzed Riley's choices, noting how she subtly redirected attention, created protective barriers, and guided the room without overt confrontation. The gunman's aggression remained, but his focus was increasingly divided, his energy spread thin by Riley's skillful management. Reynolds recognized that her calm was tactical, not passive. She had created a controlled environment in a situation that would have paralyzed most experienced professionals. The gunman swung the weapon toward a young man in a wheelchair, his face twisted with panic and anger. Riley acted instantly, moving in front of him, her body a shield. "Stay calm. We're keeping you safe," she whispered. Her tone was authoritative yet non-threatening, commanding respect without inciting fear. The gunman hesitated again, uncertainty creeping into his movements. Riley had created moments of pause, moments that were critical. Each second bought time for staff and patients to move or hide. Minutes stretched, each second heavy with tension. Riley continued her delicate ballet of protective actions, her focus unbroken. She scanned every angle, considered every threat, and whispered instructions to anyone who might act impulsively. The gunman's packing became erratic. His aggression threatened to explode at any moment. But Riley's calm, composed demeanor dominated the room psychologically, slowing escalation. Her presence was the difference between potential tragedy and the continued survival of everyone in the ER. Reynolds silently observed, impressed by the rare combination of courage, intelligence, and instinct. Riley's actions were extraordinary for someone so new, so inexperienced in real-life crises. She had transformed panic into order, controlled aggression without violence, and protected lives through strategic composure. The gunman's energy, though unpredictable, was now being subtly managed by her influence. Even as her pulse raced and fear clawed at her chest, Riley maintained the appearance of unshakable control. She guided staff, shielded patients, and managed the gunman's attention, all without a weapon. The ER, once chaotic and vulnerable, had become a controlled battlefield with Riley at its center. Reynolds knew that when the next phase of the crisis came, Riley's instincts, bravery, and tactical awareness would continue to shape its outcome. And then, in the tense silence between breaths and whispered instructions, Riley understood. She had gained the gunman's attention, not through threats, but through calm, calculated presence. The standoff had begun in earnest, and every second from this moment forward would test courage, skill, and the thin line between survival and disaster. The ER waited on her next move. The ER had settled into a tense rhythm of controlled chaos. Riley Carter moved through the room with deliberate precision, her eyes scanning every patient, every staff member, every corner of the room for potential danger. The gunman's attention was volatile, swinging back and forth like a pendulum of panic and aggression. Riley's task was clear: shield the vulnerable, maintain order, and subtly manipulate the situation to prevent escalation. Each second was critical, and every action carried life-or-death weight. She noticed a wheelchair-bound patient near a supply cabinet exposed to the gunman's line of sight. Without hesitation, Riley glided in front of him, crouching just enough to act as a physical barrier while keeping her hands visible. Her voice remained calm, firm, and soft at the same time. "Stay down. Stay calm. We've got you." The words were simple, but in the chaos of the ER, they were powerful. Fear gripped the room, but Riley's confidence acted as a counterbalance, creating a psychological shield that helped keep the patients focused on survival instead of panic. From across the room, Commander Jack Hawk Reynolds assessed her movements. His years as a Navy SEAL had taught him to recognize operational instinct when he saw it, and Riley's every action screamed strategic awareness. She was improvising in real time, using the environment to her advantage. Medical carts became shields, monitors created visual barriers, and the flow of patients and staff was subtly directed to reduce exposure. Reynolds' instincts screamed admiration. The ER, under her guidance, had transformed into a battlefield where she was orchestrating safety with only her mind and presence. Riley quickly scanned the room for escape routes and tactical advantages. The main entrance was blocked by the gunman, but side doors and service corridors offered possible exits. She quietly directed a nurse toward a nearby supply closet, creating a temporary shield for a cluster of frightened patients. Her mind raced through scenarios. What if he lunged? What if someone panicked? What if he fired? Every possibility was accounted for, every potential reaction considered. She didn't have a weapon, yet she was making every move count. The gunman's restlessness grew. He shouted threats, waved his firearm, and stomped closer to the main group of patients. Riley's eyes flicked to Reynolds' hidden position, sensing his presence as a subtle reassurance, though she could not be certain he would intervene yet. Every second Riley maintained composure and controlled the room psychologically was a second closer to neutralizing the threat without bloodshed. She whispered instructions to staff, guiding them to move silently behind carts and through side corridors, keeping their visibility to the gunman minimal. Reynolds' hand hovered near his concealed gear, ready to act if needed, but he watched carefully. Riley's actions were keeping the gunman distracted, buying precious time. Her subtle movements were like a chess player maneuvering pieces across a board. Every action was deliberate, every step protective. She repositioned a patient in a wheelchair, guided a nurse to create a makeshift barricade, and even used a monitor cart to subtly block the gunman's line of sight, all without alerting him to her strategy. The gunman's attention flickered repeatedly between Riley and the crowd. He was agitated, but his aggression was momentarily checked by her calm influence. Riley adjusted her posture and stepped slightly closer, using body language to assert a quiet dominance. "We just want everyone to stay safe," she said, her tone even, steady. She allowed her hands to gesture subtly toward exits and barriers, reinforcing the illusion of control while guiding others to safety. Each gesture bought seconds, and seconds were life-saving. Riley noticed a young woman trembling near the triage desk, her hands covering her face in panic. She moved toward her in a fluid motion, crouching low, placing a reassuring hand on the woman's shoulder. "You're okay. We're keeping you safe. Follow my lead," she whispered. The woman's breathing slowed slightly, her eyes following Riley's calm motions rather than the frantic gunman. Small victories like this compounded, creating pockets of order amid chaos. Reynolds silently observed, recognizing the effectiveness of her instinctive tactics. The gunman, growing restless, started moving toward a cluster of patients near the supply area. Riley's eyes flicked to a metal cart nearby. With swift, quiet efficiency, she repositioned it to obstruct his path, using it as both shield and deterrent. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and fluid, requiring no force but commanding respect. She subtly guided the patients behind the barricade, ensuring that even if the gunman fired, no one in the immediate vicinity would be in direct line of fire. Minutes stretched, the tension building to a crescendo. Riley continued her delicate orchestration of the ER, whispering instructions, moving equipment, shielding patients, and constantly scanning the gunman's behavior for cues. She could sense his rising frustration, but her calm aura had begun to influence him psychologically. Each controlled word, each subtle gesture, created hesitation in him, a crucial advantage. Reynolds recognized that her ability to manage the gunman's attention, while simultaneously shielding and directing others, was exceptional. Riley repositioned a cluster of children near a back hallway, using carts and counters as makeshift barriers. She instructed the nurses quietly, "Stay low, stay calm, and move when I signal." The instructions were simple, but the execution required intense focus and coordination. The gunman's attention shifted intermittently toward her, and she used every flicker of his gaze to subtly redirect him away from the most vulnerable patients. She was no longer reacting. She was controlling the environment, shaping the situation to reduce risk and preserve life. Reynolds evaluated her for a final time, mentally noting every decision, every maneuver, every instinctive calculation. She had transformed from a rookie nurse into a tactical leader, guiding the room through an unprecedented crisis with nothing but composure, intelligence, and instinct. The gunman remained unpredictable, but Riley had bought critical time. Time for SWAT to respond, time for patients to stay protected, and time for lives to be saved. As the gunman's frustration mounted, Riley's calm became the dominant force in the room. She continued to whisper instructions, shift barriers, and reposition patients, blending empathy with tactical awareness. Each action created the subtle conditions necessary for survival. The ER, once a chaotic storm of fear and panic, had become a controlled environment under her guidance. Reynolds recognized a rare skill. She had instinctively become the commander of a crisis without training, without weapons, and without hesitation. Every patient she shielded, every nurse she guided, every subtle move she made was a calculated act of protection. She had become the pivot around which the ER's safety now revolved. Reynolds knew that the next stage, the neutralization of the threat, would depend on the foundation she had built. Her calm and tactical brilliance had turned a potentially deadly situation into a manageable one. The night was far from over, but Riley had established control, and every second of her composure counted. Gunman's attention wavered for the briefest of moments, a misstep that could cost lives or save them. Riley Carter seized it instantly. Her instincts, honed in the high-pressure environment of the ER, guided her subtle repositioning. She shifted slightly, placing herself between the most vulnerable patients and the gunman. Her hands remained empty, raised only to signal calm. "Stay low, stay calm. We're okay," she whispered, her voice steady, resonant, yet soft enough to avoid provoking panic. Every syllable was calculated, every motion deliberate. From behind a structural column, Commander Jack Hawk, Reynolds adjusted his stance. His training as a Navy SEAL had prepared him for situations like this countless times, but few civilians, if any, had exhibited the combination of calm, focus, and quick thinking Riley displayed. He had been waiting for the right moment. The gunman's hesitation provided it. Reynolds moved quietly, positioning himself for a tactical intervention. His eyes never left Riley. He knew her calm had created the crucial opening that might make all the difference. The gunman swung the weapon toward a cluster of nurses attempting to move a patient trolley. Riley reacted instantly, stepping into his line of sight with a subtle pivot of her body. Her movement was fluid, almost invisible in the chaos, yet protective. She whispered a soft command to the nearest nurse, "Move slowly, stay low." The nurse obeyed, repositioning behind a counter. The gunman's gaze flicked between Riley and the group, confused by her poise. Reynolds recognized the pattern immediately. Her calm and authority were forcing him to reassess, buying critical seconds. Riley's mind worked like a tactical processor. She calculated escape routes, potential barriers, and contingencies for every erratic movement the gunman could make. She kept her voice low and controlled, using subtle cues to direct frightened staff and patients. "Follow my lead. Stay calm. We've got you," she murmured, glancing at a child hiding under a chair. Each word was a shield, each gesture a subtle command to the room. Her psychological influence was profound. The gunman, despite his aggression, was beginning to hesitate, uncertain and unsettled by her steady presence. Reynolds took the opening. With precision and speed honed over years of SEAL training, he advanced from his cover, silently closing the distance. His movements were calculated to avoid startling the gunman and to minimize risk to the patients. Riley's subtle positioning had drawn the man's attention, creating a narrow corridor for Reynolds to maneuver. Every inch mattered. Every heartbeat was a measure of life or death. The gunman, sensing movement out of the corner of his eye, momentarily turned. Reynolds froze, blending instinct with calculation. Riley remained calm, her body still shielding the nearest patients. Her focus was unbroken. Her eyes flicked subtly toward Reynolds, signaling his presence without alarming the gunman. Her courage was tangible. She had become a human anchor, holding the chaotic environment in place. Reynolds silently acknowledged her skill, realizing her composure had made his intervention safer, more effective, and far more likely to succeed without bloodshed. Reynolds advanced, his body low, his movements silent. He had trained for countless tactical scenarios, but this one was different. The unpredictability of an armed civilian made every decision critical. The gunman's focus wavered as Riley continued to speak in calm, reassuring tones, guiding staff and shielding patients. Every second of her composure had created a window of opportunity for Reynolds, a chance to neutralize the threat without unnecessary harm. Riley shifted slightly, guiding a patient trolley into the path of the gunman, a subtle obstruction that forced him to pause. Her instincts were flawless. She had no weapon, no formal combat training, yet her mind had created a controlled battlefield. Every patient was safer, every nurse more confident, and the gunman's aggression now battled against uncertainty and hesitation. Reynolds moved like a shadow, closing in for the decisive moment. The gunman, sensing pressure from both sides, raised his voice, shouting threats that echoed through the ER. "Step back, nobody move," he barked, his finger twitching near the trigger. Riley met his gaze unwavering. Her tone softened, almost hypnotic in its steadiness. "We're okay. Nobody's going to hurt you. Let's just stay calm," she said. The words, though simple, were strategic. She controlled his line of sight, redirected his focus, and minimized his perception of threats, all while remaining exposed yet protective. Reynolds reached the optimal position. His movements were precise, a blend of speed and patience as he prepared to intervene. Riley's positioning had done more than shield patients. It had also manipulated the gunman's attention, keeping him unaware of the imminent threat behind him. The moment was razor-thin. One misstep, One sudden movement and lives could be lost. With a swift, controlled motion, Reynolds acted. His hands moved like lightning, disarming and subduing the gunman with professional precision. The weapon clattered to the floor, and the man's body went rigid for a heartbeat before collapse. Riley remained in place, shielding the nearest patients, maintaining calm until the immediate danger passed. She had held the room together, her composure enabling Reynolds' precise intervention. As the echo of the gunshot, or perhaps the sound of finality, faded, the room exhaled collectively. Patients huddled together, nurses wept quietly behind barricades, and the threat was neutralized. Riley slowly lowered her stance, her heart pounding but her outward calm unbroken. She moved to check on the nearest patients, whispering reassurances, while Reynolds quickly secured the area. The rookie nurse had not only saved lives through her courage, but had facilitated the successful intervention of a trained SEAL. Reynolds finally stepped forward, a faint nod of acknowledgement passing between them. He had watched and calculated, but Riley's instinctive, tactical, and protective skills had been the linchpin of the operation. Her calm had bought time, her courage had stabilized the room, and her strategic movements had shaped the gunman's actions long enough to prevent tragedy. He respected her bravery, her intelligence, and her instinctive command of a chaotic environment. Riley glanced around the ER, taking in the aftermath. Frightened patients slowly emerging from hiding, nurses checking each other, and the sound of approaching SWAT officers confirming the area was secure. She allowed herself a small, exhausted exhale, knowing the crisis had been averted, not by luck but by composure, quick thinking, and courage under pressure. The SEAL commander had acted, yes, but she had held the foundation of safety. Without her, the outcome could have been catastrophic. In that quiet, tense moment after the storm, Reynolds thought, few civilians could have managed a high-risk standoff with such skill. Riley Carter had not just reacted, she had anticipated, protected, and controlled the environment, all while maintaining a calm that was almost unnatural. She was extraordinary. The ER would never forget the night when a rookie nurse held the line against chaos. The tension in the ER finally began to dissipate, but the atmosphere remained heavy with the echoes of fear and adrenaline. Riley Carter's hands trembled slightly as she moved from patient to patient, but her outward calm never wavered. She checked vital signs, reassured frightened children, and whispered soothing words to parents who clutched their bobbies close. Every movement was deliberate, yet infused with empathy, a balancing act of professional skill and human compassion. Even in the wake of a life-threatening incident, she understood her role, to restore order, safety, and calm. Staff members emerged slowly from hiding spots, eyes wide with residual fear. Nurses and orderlies glanced at Riley with awe, their voices trembling as they reported injuries, or rather, the absence of them. Thanks to Riley's rapid decision-making and psychological control over the gunman, no patient had been harmed. A collective exhale passed through the ER, relief mingling with disbelief. How had a rookie nurse maintained such composure under direct threat? Her quiet courage was palpable, like a stabilizing anchor in a storm that could have otherwise spiraled into tragedy. Reynolds moved to Riley's side, his demeanor professional yet softened by admiration. "You handled that remarkably," he said quietly, his eyes scanning her for signs of exhaustion or injury. "Most people freeze in situations like that. You didn't just stay calm. You controlled the environment, protected everyone, and bought the time we needed. That was extraordinary." Riley offered a faint, exhausted smile, her focus still on the patients. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had done what was necessary. The first responders and SWAT teams began to enter the ER, securing the gunman and ensuring no further threat remained. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, their presence now a reassurance rather than a looming threat. Patients began to cry softly, some from fear, some from relief. Riley knelt beside a young boy, brushing his hair back from his tear-streaked face. "It's okay now. You're safe," she whispered. The boy's mother clutched her hand, gratitude shining in her eyes. Riley felt a swell of something she couldn't quite name. Relief, pride, perhaps validation that her instincts and calm had mattered more than she'd imagined. The nurses and staff began to regroup, exchanging quiet words, some laughing nervously, others holding each other. A few thanked Riley directly, their voices tinged with awe. She nodded, guiding them to help patients remain calm. She moved seamlessly, ensuring that medical care resumed, that IVs were checked, monitors reset, and that the ER returned to functional order as quickly as possible. In the midst of chaos, Riley became the organizing principle, a quiet force that kept the fragile peace intact. Reynolds observed the scene, nodding Riley's unflagging attention to detail. She had protected life without hesitation, without panic, and without weaponry. Her psychological presence had steered the gunman's attention, controlled his aggression, and shielded those most at risk. Her courage had created a safe corridor for him to be neutralized efficiently. Reynolds knew that while he had acted as the trained operative, Riley's instincts had been the linchpin in the entire operation. Few civilians could manage a standoff of this magnitude without panic. Even fewer could do so with tactical foresight and psychological acuity. As the hospital administration arrived to assess the situation, Riley continued to move methodically, checking on patients and staff alike. She offered words of reassurance to frightened nurses, ensuring that no one relived the trauma alone. "You did great. Everyone's safe now," she told them, her voice gentle but confident. Slowly, the tension in the room began to lift. The ER, once dominated by fear and uncertainty, was returning to normalcy. Her calm, deliberate actions had orchestrated the restoration of order. Reynolds finally approached her fully, nodding in acknowledgement. "You've got instincts most trained professionals spend years developing. You need to know you saved lives tonight." Riley shook her head, still processing. I just did what I had to," she murmured, though her voice carried the faint tremor of adrenaline crashing into relief. Reynolds smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's exactly what heroes do. They act, without hesitation, without question. You did more than that, you led." The hospital staff slowly began to share their experiences. Stories emerged of Riley shielding patients, guiding nurses, and projecting calm authority. The ER had been a battlefield, but thanks to her composure, chaos had been contained and the crisis neutralized. Patients were wheeled to safer areas, some still crying softly, others whispering thanks to the brave nurses who had guided them. Riley quietly moved through the room, her presence grounding, offering reassurance with every step. Reynolds took a final scan of the ER, observing Riley one last time before heading to assist law enforcement. Her tactical instincts, courage, and emotional composure had made a difference that words could scarcely capture. She had not only saved lives, she had provided a psychological buffer that prevented further escalation. Every patient she had shielded, every nurse she had guided, every subtle action she had taken, contributed to a night that could have ended in tragedy but didn't. As the adrenaline began to fade, Riley finally allowed herself a deep, shuddering breath. She felt exhaustion, yes, but also a sense of quiet pride. She had faced the unimaginable, acted decisively, and saved lives. She had been terrified, but fear had not paralyzed her. It had sharpened her focus, strengthened her resolve, and guided her actions. She looked around the ER, observing the patients, the staff, and the quiet order that had been restored. She had led in chaos, and somehow she had emerged unbroken. The administration began recording statements, while counselors quietly moved through the ER, offering emotional support to both patients and staff. Riley guided a few nurses to safety and comfort, ensuring no one felt abandoned. She finally allowed herself to glance at Reynolds, who offered a small, respectful nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of her heroism, a recognition that transcended words. Riley realized that though she had only wanted to help, she had done more than help. She had led, protected, and shaped the outcome of a life-or-death crisis with nothing but courage and calm presence. Even in the aftermath, the energy of the ER remained electric, charged with relief, gratitude, and awe. Riley stood quietly, absorbing the enormity of what had happened. She had acted instinctively, yet with precision. She had faced fear head-on and in doing so had saved countless lives. And though she remained humble, she understood the truth. She had been extraordinary tonight, a calm center in a storm that could have destroyed everything. The chaos of the night had faded into a tense quiet, the kind of calm that followed a storm but still carried the echoes of its fury. Riley Carter finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, her hands shaking slightly as she wiped sweat from her brow. The ER was alive with movement, staff tending to patients, counselors offering support, officers taking statements, but the immediate danger was over. She had survived her first real test as a nurse, and she had emerged not just alive, but instrumental in saving lives. The weight of that realization pressed on her, both humbling and empowering. Commander Jack "Hawk" Reynolds approached her again, this time with the formal demeanor of a mentor recognizing raw talent. "Riley," he began, voice low but steady, "you have instincts most people spend a lifetime trying to develop. Calm under fire, protective of everyone around you, and decisive when it mattered most. That was extraordinary." Riley's eyes met his, and she allowed herself a small, grateful smile. She had wanted to help, never to be called a hero, but the acknowledgement from someone like Reynolds carried a weight that she couldn't dismiss. The hospital administration gathered around, offering thanks, congratulations, and relief. The ER staff, still trembling from adrenaline, praised her calmness and leadership. "We would have been lost without you," one nurse said softly. "You kept everyone alive." Another echoed, "Riley, you didn't just help us, you led us." The rookie nurse, who had walked into the ER only weeks ago filled with nerves and uncertainty, now stood at the center of recognition, the respect of her peers unmistakable in their faces and voices. Riley reflected silently on the night's events, her mind replaying each decision, each action. The gunman's erratic movements, the strategic barriers she had positioned, the patients she had shielded, the whispers of reassurance to terrified staff, all of it had been instinctive, yet deliberate. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Each heartbeat that had threatened to betray panic had instead been channeled into focus, protecting lives and buying time for Reynolds to intervene safely. Reynolds observed her quietly, nodding the rare combination of bravery, quick thinking, and psychological awareness. Few civilians could manage a high-stakes standoff with such skill. Fewer still could manipulate the environment and the aggressor without escalating violence. He finally spoke again, his tone respectful and serious. "You've got what it takes, Riley. You may not realize it yet, but tonight you saved lives that had no margin for error. That's not luck. That's skill, courage, and instinct." The SWAT officers, having secured the gunman and ensured no further threat existed, offered nods of acknowledgement. Even law enforcement recognized that the rookie nurse had played a critical role in shaping the outcome. The crisis had been neutralized not through force alone, but through calm, strategic leadership, through a woman who had never imagined she could influence life and death so directly. Riley moved through the ER, checking on each patient one last time. She whispered reassurances to frightened children, guided parents in comforting their loved ones, and reminded staff to take a breath, to regain composure. The room, once dominated by fear, now carried a quiet sense of safety and relief. She had been the anchor that held everything together, and though she was exhausted, there was an unshakable satisfaction in knowing that her actions had mattered. As the hospital slowly returned to normal operations, news of Riley's bravery began to spread. Administrators documented the incident in reports, emphasizing the role of her calm leadership in preventing casualties. Reynolds, while quietly professional, recommended a formal recognition for her courage. "This is the kind of instinctive leadership we need more of," he said. "She should be honored, trained, and remembered." Riley blushed at the praise, her humility intact, yet the acknowledgement reinforced the profound impact of her actions. Later that night, Riley sat alone for a moment, the adrenaline finally ebbing, and reflected on the transformation she had undergone. The rookie nurse who had walked into the ER weeks ago, nervous and unsure, had faced a life-threatening crisis and emerged as a leader. She had discovered inner strength she hadn't known she possessed, learned to master fear, and realized the true meaning of courage under pressure. The experience had changed her. She was no longer just a nurse. She was someone who could lead, protect, and influence outcomes in critical moments. Reynolds approached once more, standing quietly beside her. "You're going to make an incredible nurse, Riley. And not just that, you'll inspire others. Tonight showed what's possible when courage meets intelligence, focus meets empathy. Don't ever doubt yourself." Riley nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. She knew that her actions had mattered, that lives had been saved, and that she had grown in ways she couldn't have imagined. The gunman's arrest, the restoration of order, and the acknowledgement from staff, law enforcement, and Reynolds combined to create a moment that would be remembered in the hospital for years. Riley had demonstrated that heroism doesn't always come with a uniform or weapon. Sometimes, it comes from courage, composure, and the ability to make precise, protective decisions in moments of chaos. She had become a symbol of calm in crisis, a reminder that one individual's focus and bravery could save countless lives. As the first light of dawn crept through the ER windows, Riley Carter stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by staff, patients, and officers. She reflected on the night, the fear, the chaos, and the triumph. She had been terrified, yes, but she had acted decisively, protected others, and influenced the outcome of a deadly situation. And in that reflection, she realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. She had made that choice, and the lives she had saved would never forget it. The night was over, but Riley's journey had only begun. Her first week as an ER nurse had transformed into a story of courage, calm, and instinctive heroism, a story that would inspire everyone who heard it. She had faced danger, protected life, and discovered the extraordinary within herself. And as the hospital returned to normal, Riley knew one thing for certain. She would never forget the lesson of the night when fear met courage and calm met chaos. She had survived, led, and grown.